Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Caro Goulet, and I am the gallery director here at 5 Points. I won't be long, but I just wanted to bring a few things to your attention. These exhibitions will be up through April 22nd. 5 Points Gallery's exhibitions are free and open to the public. The gallery is open Tuesday through Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. and by appointment. Just call the gallery at 860-618-7222 to schedule an appointment. For more information on these shows and for more of our events, please visit our website at 5pointsarts.org. Tonight's talk will be recorded and available on our website shortly. If anyone has any questions throughout tonight's talk, you're welcome to type them into the chat and or Q&A boxes, which are located at the bottom of your screens. Featured on tonight's panel are all three of our exhibiting artists. Bridget Grady's beautifully rendered paintings in our West Gallery focus on the fragile ecologies of forest and swamps from the various ecosystems she's explored. Kathleen Schroeder's intricate prints combine lithography and collagraph techniques that emphasize liminal spaces between art and science. And Robert Taplin's mixed media works combine layered imagery that move back and forth between the illusion and the reality of three dimensions, focusing on opposing yet entangled forces of modernity. Moderating tonight's talk is Matthew Best. Matt is a Hartford, Connecticut-based artist who received his BFA in painting from the University of Hartford Art School, and his MFA in painting from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Formerly a resident at Arlington Art Center, Matt has shown his work in numerous local and national exhibitions. I'll pass things over to Matt and we can get started. Thank you.
I remembered to unmute myself. Hey, everyone. As Carl already said, if you have questions, please type them in and I will insert them into the conversation as we go along. So don't feel like you're interrupting. I will insert them as we can. As we get started, I was thinking, just in case people haven't seen the show, if all of you would kind of talk about your show at 5 Points, kind of what work you put into it, talk a little bit about what the work has in the kind of themes in your work, whatever comes to mind. Whoever wants to go first.
I guess that's me. I am primarily a printmaker. I work in lithography for the most part. It's kind of what I've decided to focus on. My work is really because I also trained in science and sort of enjoy the information that diagrams and things like that can give. I've pretty much stayed in that lane, but for a long time I was making these kinds of prints and I didn't really understand why. And I realized that I have the benefit now of, thinking about science in the way I like to think about it, but then also get to kind of break all the rules and not have to follow the laws of physics or geometry or anything and kind of make my own little worlds. And they don't have to necessarily mean anything to anybody. I think what was really interesting to me when I was at the show and in talking to people at the show was that everybody kind of saw something different in the work I did, which I think that's a really good thing, at least as far as I'm concerned. I sometimes feel like it's not really anything. It's not really science. It's not really art. But then I've really come to embrace kind of the way I work. And I really love the printmaking art form because it's this mix of strategy and process and technical expertise that it requires. And so I kind of get the best of both worlds.
That was actually one question I wanted to ask you about. Because you said the word that I was thinking, diagrams. Are these based on actual? It was like a visual language you're kind of using.
Mm-hmm.
Are these based on actual in some ways actual diagrams used in science, or is this completely your own visual language or a combination of the two?
I would say maybe a combination of the two, but mostly my own visual language. Some of them remind me of things that I'm familiar with in science, and so I tend to kind of want to embrace that. But then a lot of times I'll just start with a shape and just keep building, and it becomes kind of a puzzle that I solve, so that everything kind of visually works in my brain. And so there's not really anything always systematic about it, except that, like, for instance, this series is very monochromatic and very, because I was on a certain plan to create as many different variations using these techniques in this sort of format. So I would say it's kind of a combination of the two.
Okay. Because the diagram, some of them felt like they were trying to impart information to me in some way, like communicate something, and others felt more, for lack of a better term, artsy.
No, and I agree. And it's been kind of an exploration for me. I would say that I'm sort of trying to figure that out for myself right now too.
Okay. All right. Who wants to go next? Thank you.
All right, I'll speak up. This show was an opportunity for me to finish a set of work that I'd been working on for quite a few years off and on. These relief pieces down here below. So there are 8 of them. They're called Recreation and Rebellion. They alternate between a relief that's got detached figures and a relief that is just a flat relief. And the flat low relief ones, these are the ones with the detached figures. They're the rebellion ones, and these are the recreation ones. It's a series about the public theater of violence, right? You know, violence as entertainment and violence as rebellion. They're both theatrical situations in which, of course, people can actually get hurt, but they're both situations that are playing to an audience of a sort. So this was an opportunity. I had 5 of them. They were shown down in Richmond a few years ago, and this was an opportunity to finish them. And the other works are the ghost boxes. This is one of the rebellion ones, border fence. The other works are the Action works, which are ghost boxes, which are a double image. You can't really get a photograph of it. It's a little theater with an actual theatrical situation of 3-dimensional things in the back that is you're looking at through a plane of another image, which is being brought down from above through a 45-degree angle mirror. It's called a ghost box. And so the two things are at the same focal length, and they interpenetrate in an uneasy way. And these 2 pieces are called Action 1 and Action 2 from the Greek myth about the guy who goes out hunting and he sees Diana, the goddess Diana, naked in the woods, and she sees him and she doesn't like that. And so she turns him into a stag, and his own hounds run him down. So this is where he's trying to get out of there. I'm in trouble. And the other one is where the hounds have caught him.
So I was curious about those 2 pieces in particular. Obviously, you're working in themes of violence, but how'd you choose that myth in particular?
Oh, I've been involved with classical literature and ancient literature right along. It's a sort of it's a side avenue in the contemporary art world. Not very many people are involved with it, but people like Leslie Dill and whatnot have sort of addressed literature poetry in particular as a format. I did a whole series on the first 9 cantos of Dante's Inferno. And I had thought of working with Ovid. And Ovid is the classic Roman poet source for a bunch of those myths, including the Actian myth. So this was a sort of, the Actian pieces were a test run on that, and I haven't followed it up. It's remained a single thing.
All right.
And
The
then
other one.
these are these
go ahead.
double image photographs that are also overlay photographs that I call right-of-ways, that have to do with mostly with the sort of interference of the transportation networks with residual places left over from the fact that the transit networks and the advertising signs and all the rest of it are moving through. So it has a lot to do. Yeah, they're double overlay and sometimes triple overlay images that relate to the Actian pieces, which are also a double image.
Before we move on, I wanted to ask one question. We're past this piece, but runway. The other images are more clear references to violence, and I kind of not stuck, but I kind of stopped at that one and spent more time with it just because I was unclear somewhat. It just stood out to me as being different than the other ones, and I was wondering if you would talk about that one. I have ideas, but I was just curious what you were thinking.
That's legitimate. I think it is a little different. The other ones are overt violence. The violence of the fashion industry is a little bit more suppressed, but it's there. Those women are starving themselves to death in order to look like they're 8 feet tall and walk out there in those often kind of outrageous clothes with everybody clapping for it. So yeah, there's plenty of violence in the fashion industry. I don't think there's any question about that.
All right.
But
No,
not as overt as the rodeo or the box or
No, that was along the lines of my thing. It's a more almost gendered violence. It's more targeted against women. There's more issues of body and arguably class. I just thought it was interesting in comparison to the other ones.
Well, I mean, there was sort of an issue with a gender issue in that series where I was trying to sort of even it up. The violence is perhaps incorrectly, but to some degree, statistically correctly associated with men. And so, there's one girl in that group, but I did sort of want to sort of do what I could to, moderate that a little bit. That it's a human thing. It's not just a male thing.
Yeah. All right, Bridget, last but not least.
All right. I was very happy to be asked to do this show and get to see these pieces really all together, and because they were done on 2 different continents, and most of my work is usually involved with the environment one way or another. I was talking earlier with Kathleen. It might always look different. So this is a series I go back to on and off. This is over years of time. It started here. It started, this painting here was the first piece I did in Singapore, where I switched from I was working on vernal pools, and really a lot of the paintings are from one puddle over years. I just kept on painting this one puddle in White's Woods, where I live now. And then as I moved on to a completely different environment in Singapore, I got up off the ground and started looking up to the trees, which were just completely overwhelming, and as I was in that environment, it just, something didn't feel right. And I realized as I lived there longer that most of that stuff wasn't native, that it was brought in the 1800s when the British were trying to get everyone to come over to Singapore, and so they made it look more tropical. A lot of those trees are actually from Madagascar, but they function over there as a way to cool the city. And on each tree is like thousands of ecosystems. It's just they're just amazing. Just a branch. You could just spend years on a branch. So my desire is not to be with this series is, I can paint pretty tight, and I go back and forth between expressive and tight. That has to go another direction, Carl. Which is funny, when I had a show in Singapore, they hung them all upside down because there were reflections of water, and they knew the blue was the sky, but it was a city. But I really want more like when you're out there and you're painting it and you're staring at it for a long time, and the reflection is definitely a device that was helpful to get into this like this mental space, kind of a little psychedelic, where space pushes back and pulls, and like the periphery colors. So I really wanted to make people kind of, or try to make, you can never control that, people feel like what I feel when I'm in the woods and what I see. And, even just a mud puddle is just gorgeous if you look at it long enough.
I want to talk about painting with you, but we can do this on Sunday. I have a lot of geeky painting questions, but I won't bore everyone. So if I remember right, one of the series was started in 2017. Is that correct?
No, I
Am I way
started
off?
this.
Okay.
There's different pieces in there. I think I started 2006, and then I stayed in Singapore till 2011, and then I think there's one piece that I did when I came back, in like 2017, and then my life majorly changed for like pretty much the last decade. So I haven't been working ginormous anymore for now.
I was interested in the different scales that you were working. A small painting I thought worked really beautifully in the space that it's hung in, and worked very differently than the larger paintings.
That one was on site. Other ones are from sketches, but photographs too.
Okay.
I start out in the woods. In fact, when I first started painting this one puddle, one of the park rangers from White Memorial, I think he thought I was, I don't know, on some kind of substance, because I'm out there, out there in the woods, and I'm like on this little tussock painting moss, and he's like, "Are you all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm all right." He's like, "You're sure you're all right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You're not on anything." I'm like, "No,
I'm on art.
I'm just an artist.
He's like, "What are you painting?" I'm like, "This puddle, I don't know." So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in talking with Carl about the show, the theme that kind of came up that united the three of you to varying degrees was liminal spaces. And I was wondering how each of you feels that idea figures into your work or not. Like Kathleen, you say it flat out. So maybe.
I think it stems a lot from the fact that, I've kind of approached art from kind of two very different perspectives. I mean, when I was working on my PhD, that was a very specific way of thinking. And then art is a somewhat different way of thinking, and yet they are also sort of related. And so I've always felt like, at least especially now that I'm really focusing on my art, I kind of am in between two different places. And so when I was drawing a lot of these prints, I would think about tangents and how lines interact and intersect, and then form moments where they connect, but then they pass on. And so this idea of a passage, or something that's not permanent, but it becomes part of who we are as a person and in our lives. For instance, like looking at a map. When you're looking at a map, you're driving through towns and you see these dots that are cities, but they're whole worlds for people who have lived in these places, and you know nothing about it. So for me, I think that's where this started for me, and it's the way I've been thinking about things.
Thank you.
Yeah, the liminal spaces thing is right on the button for me. That's exactly right. I mean, and there are different ways of looking at it. These action pieces, you're talking about the liminal space in a, you know, in a sort of urban environment. If you look at the other one, the blue one, you know, there's a, you know, you've got these cars coming over a bridge, but then the liminal part, of course, is that entrance of that mythic consciousness into everyday quotidian life, that, you know, sense of a mythic moment, that's maybe a delusion or an illusion or a hallucination or who knows what it is. But so that's a sort of a psychological liminal space. The relief ones are more of a, yeah, a social liminal space, you know, people who are operating at the margins for one reason or another. Certainly the rebellion ones are all about that. The recreation ones, you know, they're more within the social structure, but yeah, those are niche worlds where people, you know, if you work in the rodeo or women's boxing, you're in a niche world that is related to the broader society, but you're definitely out somewhere near the edge.
Oh, well, I've definitely took landscape to, I didn't want to do just, you know, quote unquote, the picturesque. And often, especially in the trees, I see those trees and plants and rocks as animate, probably stand-ins for figure. And but they're definitely not pretty places. They're not like where a normal person would go sit, I guess. Apparently. So yeah, but they're important places because it's definitely the wetlands are, you know, they're the kidneys of the land, and where a lot of species that are important in an ecosystem are living. And in vernal pools, definitely with climate change, you know, some of those species won't, without the right circumstances, they can't breed. They stay in a, like, not a hibernation, but they don't come around. So they're important places, but they're overlooked places.
I was thinking too, just the vernal pool itself is a pretty good metaphor for
Yep.
a liminal space. It's just something that exists for maybe not even a season. I'm not sure
Mhm.
offhand, but it's temporary, crucially important to the life cycle of creatures, and then it kind of disappears.
Yep. So
Oops, sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was saying, so I was thinking of another question. Robert, a lot of your artist statement has to do with opposition between two different things. I was just curious, between all of you, what connections and oppositions you see between your work and your fellow artists' work. It's kind of out of left field, but
My work and my fellow artists' work.
yeah, do you see any connections between the other two, or?
Oh, but between the other two, yes, well, absolutely. No, for sure. You know, I mean, my idea of, you know, I'm interested in paradox and contradiction and things that have to do with struggle, not with, you know, I was just at the last of 4 lectures today at Yale that John Walsh gave about Mondrian, and talking about all that utopian thinking at the beginning of this, you know, 20th century and the years before, then even after the First World War, and Mondrian's idea of trying to make an image that had a perfect dynamic equilibrium. It was opposing forces that came to a standstill. And I love Mondrian, but it's not the world I work in. I work in a world where the opposing forces are in real conflict and are stirring things up to some degree. And certainly I can see that in Bridget's work, it's very quietly presented in its way, because your work, Bridget, is so lush. I mean, it's
Thank you.
gorgeous, but it's lush. And so the sort of the threat that's under there emerges slowly, and you could even miss it altogether. It's possible to look at your painting and say, wow, it's just so beautiful, and not think about what's going on. That it's an image of environment at risk. And Kathleen's, I think it's a little bit, it's a little harder for me to relate directly to it, but I certainly know exactly what you're talking about in terms of diagrams and maps and things being real and essential. My wife talks about, worked with autistic children all life. She talks about cognitive maps. You can't navigate without a cognitive map. And yet those things are also very vulnerable, actually. They're not, we depend on them, but there is that sense that maybe you shouldn't, or it may fail you. And that's the part that I sort of relate to in what Kathleen's doing.
Yeah, and Kathleen's work, when I look at your work and when I looked at your work, I thought it was based on cosmology or some type of language that was, I felt the science in it before I read about you, and the mathematicalness of it. But when you do look at it for a while, just through the, the density and all the rest of the line, and it starts to create a space, but I definitely see it as a language. And if it, I don't know, my husband and I have been like totally nerding out on the planet thing going on right now. And so I totally see this, and probably like as an old manuscript describing like the movement of a planet, or how the moon moves through its phases. So that's what I got off of that. And in Robert's work, I definitely like the theme and the way that you put the violence as not in your face so much, and that it's presented as a frieze, which is kind of definitely a medieval way of working, but your substance is definitely modern, and your subject matter is modern, but it's been going on through the ages, the gladiators and whatever, and how we constrict women into whatever kind of fashion statement. And fashion industry right now is huge in the environment, fast fashion and all the rest. So not only are we, forcing women into a certain way of looking, we're doing immense, environmental damage with the dyes and all the rest of that stuff. But I think what I was probably most attracted to was the boxes, because I like that, I'm definitely a natural history buff type of thing. So like I like the dioramic feel. I like the fact that, you have that's not, you can't do that with paint very easily, because you get those nice layers in between so that the space moves in and out. And especially on this piece, I like that because it's like memory in space. So like perhaps this is a you're in contemporary times, but the environment, the landscape itself has a memory, and some event might have happened in there, and one way or another, you might, even though, the Diana story and is myth, some act of violence can happen in an area. And do you pick up on it? Do you do your senses pick up on it? You know, that memory is embedded in the place. I don't know, just off the wall.
No, that's great.
Kathleen, do you have any thoughts?
I do, and it's interesting because a lot of the things that I draw are they make me feel secure. And in a way, when I look at the other two artists, they're both kind of talking about insecurity and stuff. And for instance, when I draw, I don't ever have a shape that's like in danger of falling out of the grid. It's really important to me that it ties together and stays strong that way. And I think that it still describes sort of the same things that the other artists are talking about in terms of conflict and changing environment and threat and things like that. And so maybe I think the way I've been thinking about it as I've listened to these other two artists talk is that I think this is my way of kind of containing my world into a secure place.
Well, I was thinking about it during the show that your work is very modernist in a way, and as you said, balanced and kind of contained. And then Robert brought up Mondrian, like kind of modernism and utopia, and that was kind of where I was wondering if that's where we were heading a little bit. But yeah, that very much comes across. And while I have you, we have a question for you from the Q&A section.
Okay.
So keep them coming. Do you use a computer to generate your images or drafting tools? Or
I use
neither?
drafting tools only. I don't use my computer at all. I don't have the greatest relationship with my computer. And, so no, I like the tools. I like using my hands. And so everything that are in these prints are things that I've hand drawn using templates and rulers and protractors and compasses and things like that, because for me, it makes me feel more a part of it. And so no, I don't use a computer. That's not to say I never will, but I also like to see my hand in it. You know, I like to see the wobbly line every once in a while, and that maybe makes me frustrated in the moment. But when I look at it, I want it to look like a human being drew it.
All right. Let me find my question. Robert, I wanted to ask you about this. It's something I liked your artist statement a lot because you brought up an interesting group of people. So where is it? Derrida, Foucault, and Steve Bannon. I just thought it was something I've been thinking about, how they kind of took ideas of post-structuralism and turned it on its head and used it against us. And that's exactly what you were talking about in your artist statement. So maybe not really a question, but would you talk about that more? Because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I've had a very sort of difficult relationship with the whole Foucault world, you know, the world of that French deconstructionist philosophy, you know, right along. It's not that I don't believe they were onto something. They were onto something. I accept the idea that their general premise that, you know, what they were calling the great narratives, all the talk about, you know, truth, beauty, and the American way or whatever was just a smokescreen for political oppression of one sort or another. And so I saw them as coming very much, you know, I believe, was Foucault Algerian? I know Camus was. I mean, I think of them very much as post-colonial thinkers, you know, people who are looking at the post-colonial era and were, you know, furious at what had gone on. But as in so many ways, so many other things we're seeing, the right wing has, you know, basically the right wing right now is acting just the way Abby Hoffman did in the 60s. You know, so the old new left, and of course Foucault and all of them were 68ers, they were all very much involved in that era of politics in France. The theatrical tactics of the left wing have now been completely co-opted and adopted by the right wing, and have come back to bite us in the tail. And so yeah, I mean, it's a gruesome prospect, and I'm not, you know, and my feeling is that you have to sort of drop back behind the sort of 68ers and try and look at the sort of the whole philosophical and political tradition of the West in a little broader way. And that's my deal about Romanticism and you know, the Enlightenment and the anti-Enlightenment. You know, the Foucault and all of them were severe anti-humanists, anti-Enlightenment thinkers, and at this point you have to sort of take the universal ideals of the Enlightenment a little bit more seriously in order to survive what we're what we're looking at politically. So yeah, those are big, complicated issues.
Very much so.
Yeah, yeah. They do
Well,
play into the art, though. I mean, that's an even more complicated discussion about where the art. My feeling is that much of the art world has been basically helpless faced with current political developments. They don't know where to turn. Basically, the whole vocabulary of postmodernism is absolutely helpless when it comes to trying to confront current politics. It doesn't work. It's not of any use, the postmodernist way of making art.
interesting.
That's my point of view.
So you brought up colonialism, which made me think of you, Bridget, because you talked about painting trees that weren't indigenous to Singapore, I believe it was. Was colonialism something
That
you
is
fell into? Was it
colonialism.
something you're thinking of, or was it kind of you started painting it and you realized that's what those trees were? Did you know about it going into it? Or?
I started to I did another series. I loved being over there, and if any of my students watch this, best thing ever, best people I've ever met. But definitely it was a complete shock of an environment. It was completely urban. Everything was meticulously done. I would have a day where I'd like go to this place that I knew, like a store, and then I'd go there 2 days later and I wouldn't know where I was because overnight they would have put up a wall, a building, and an entire mature tree garden. And I'm like, you know, so I started to realize that nothing I looked at was, you know, real at all. I was on the Jurong side, so that was the forest side of Singapore. It was in my forest though. Like I'm like, oh, this is cool. You know, I'm gonna, you know, my students are like, don't touch that. That's like poisonous. There's cobras in here. I'm like, oh my God, you know. So I was, I had
It's
some
always the
adventures.
cobras.
Yeah, those cobras. You know, my friend moved his refrigerator and found a nest of them. I'm like, oh God, yeah, you know. Dengue fever, didn't know what that was. I was like, oh, why are they spraying? Then I'm like, oh, you know, your eyes bleed. Yeah, that's not a good thing. So yeah, I could feel the falseness of it. And then I started reading the history and I learned my students were so awesome. I learned as much as I could about their culture. It was way too vast to even scratch the surface in 5 years. It's a totalitarian society. It looks, you know, modern and capitalist, but, you know, there's definitely glass barriers that, you know, something untoward could happen if you violate something unknowingly or knowingly, especially knowingly. So yeah, I spent a lot of time at the zoo looking at environments there. I did travel a lot in Southeast Asia, and ironically, New Zealand seemed the most normal to me because that was a colonial environment too, because people from the British Isles and the Irish moved over there, and the climate was so perfect for a lot of our, you know, normal colonial plantings, and then they took off over there like for for instance, like if you have a rose in San Francisco and it's this big, it might be that big in Singapore, it'd be the same species. You know, here I struggle to get rosemary to grow for a couple of years. They have hedges of rosemary, like 8 feet tall, you know, so it's kind of amazing. So yeah, to know that even, you know, your stereotypical ideas of like a tropical place and, you know, you're going to this, you know, the stamp of Western culture was all over the place, and it was for tourism even 200 years ago. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I had no idea. That's very interesting. So one question I've been thinking about with all of your work, do you see, like, to different degrees, your work is all very personal and also at times political? What do you see your work as more political or more personal, or in your thinking about and creating your work, which of those two things comes first for everyone?
I'm going to say mine's political, but in response to Robert, who is vastly more qualified in the critical theory literature than I am, because you were involved in that place. I came late to that. I was a little rebellious towards that. Actually, I got kind of sick of it in academia, though it's very important stuff on a political nature. My work is, yes, I want to, if I'm the only one that's going to look at it, I better like looking at it. If it doesn't get out there, but really to not, my intention is environmental, and you have to seduce people. I feel like the whole environmental movement has been like, I can't even watch stuff about, you know, baby animals and destruction of this. After a while, it's just, you shut down. So to seduce people into looking at nature through any kind of beauty is probably the best thing I can do. And then through teaching, educate people, but not make them feel guilty as they come in.
Yeah, the politics kind of wends its way into what I do, but it certainly starts with personal motivations. I mean, I work a lot. All those relief pieces, for instance, a lot of those are worked up from photojournalistic sources. So this is stuff that has come out of the papers or the tabloids or some of them I've used video stills, but it's coming out of the sort of media world. So there's an inherent politics to that, but I do sort of look for things in that world of the media that strike a bell with me. But there's the personal motivations there in the at the core of things. I'm setting problems for myself and trying to solve them. And I like what Bridget was saying. I mean, I was never really an academic myself, and I certainly found a lot of the academic drivel over theory extremely tedious. And Bertolt Brecht always used to say, he's like a fervent left-wing communist, just to the core. I mean, there's a guy who went back to East Germany after after he got out of this country during the McCarthy world. But he used to say, you gotta give him a tune to sing. I mean, the Brecht plays are very intentionally entertaining despite their fervent politics. And that relates to what Bridget was saying, and I'm all for that.
Great. Kathleen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would definitely say that my work is very personal, and in fact, one of the things I struggle with and am challenged by is the fact that sometimes I go very deep into my own head and have a hard time kind of getting out of it. And so, yeah, in fact, I think that, again, sometimes I find politics and things going on in the world kind of overwhelming for me. And so I think that this work is my way of kind of coping with that. But I pretty much choose not to do anything political because it just also gives me anxiety. So no, my work is all very personal. I really respect artists who can look at the world around them and try to reflect and say something about what they see. For me, it's all about kind of my inner world and how I structure my thought, and how I like to exist in my art making. It's not meant to be political at all. Now, I mean, I've never had anyone say that I saw anything political in it, and I would maybe be surprised if someone did, but it's not meant to be there if it is.
Yeah, and it doesn't come across to me as political, but my only thought is so much of your artist statement and what you've talked about is about science, which lately has been inherently politicized to some degree, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
it was just kind of interesting, like inadvertently falling into something in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of, but there's a lot of good scientists out there who really just want to make good work. And I don't mean make art, but do good work and find new things that really do help people. And so I try to kind of focus on that aspect of the whole political aspect of everything in science. To me, science is a beautiful thing. It's pretty much the same thing as art. It's about, trying to find the truth in something. And so for me, I try to stay in that lane.
That's one thing I wanted to ask about. Which came first, art or science, or same time?
Oh no, long time ago, I went to the University of Minnesota and got a PhD in developmental genetics, where I studied body axis formation in the genes involved in setting up a body plan, which is, don't get me started because I'll talk forever. Anyway, it was all very interesting. But then I've always been a maker of things. And then, life circumstances happen. And then, I had to make some choices about my family versus having a real career in science, which is very demanding time-wise, especially. So I kind of put it on the back burner. And then once my kids were a little older, I decided I wanted I was kind of past that point of when I was going to try to either work in academics or in a professional kind of aspect, like in a company or something. And so I just started to think about, well, what could I do that would, allow me to, have goals and find things to do, but then but still allow me to use my hands and use my brain and things like that. So, and that's when I decided to go back to school. And I actually did go to the University of Hartford in the, and did all my work in the print shop there, and then ended up teaching there also. So, no, the science was definitely first. And I think that's always been kind of my core. My undergraduate degree was in microbiology. So it's always been important to me, but I'm really enjoying the freedom of making these things without having to worry about, having to make it factual. It's really fun for me to kind of develop my own little scientific world.
Does your work tend to be this geometric? Because I was thinking it was interesting talking about biology and genetics, but you do very geometric. So like, it just seems kind of different than I would expect. Not that but does your work always been more geometric, or did you work more organic, like with more organic shapes at some point, or?
No, I've always worked in a pretty geometric way. And I think part of it is because, when you look at data and things like that, it gives you information. And there's something about lines I just love, and it just resonates with me. My thesis work or my dissertation work was all about cells dividing and how they line up and the structure and how they they become a functional unit to make a living being. And so I guess I would say that, yeah, I've always worked this way because it makes sense to me. I mean, actually the art students that could draw, like, you know, the illustrators and everything were completely, I'm so impressed with people who really can draw that way. For me, the structure is the most important thing. And then I just go from there.
All right, thank you. We're starting to run out of time, so if you have questions in the audience, now would be a great time to ask them. One thing I was thinking of, it's a lowball question, but it's one I'm interested in. The role of color in all of your work. Like Kathleen, you don't use a ton of color, but using color is also a choice. Or Robert, your color seems very particular choices in the reliefs. And then Bridget, yours an extravaganza of color. So just curious what thought goes into that when you start working. Is it
For me,
anyone?
I play around with I either have something in my head, not on this one. This would be more accentuating what I saw, you know, playing up, accentuating what I saw. The first one, the tree one, it's called Australia. It's actually in my head, I call it the meningitis tree because the river behind it there was a sign there that said, "Don't swim here, meningitis river."
Also a good title.
Yeah. I always got something to say, right? But I was interested in the flesh there, and then like that whole thing is done in 4 colors: yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and raw umber. And I wanted to push it as much as possible to see if I could get it to go purple or yellow. So I'll play games like that. I might start a whole painting in acrylic and have it fairly naturalistic, and then just pour purple all over it and wipe it off and see what I like and find an area and just kind of riff from there. I always
Okay.
start from something. I don't just totally invent everything.
While you have we have a geeky paint question from the audience for you. At least one of your paintings says oil and acrylic. To use an acrylic underpainting, or do they combine?
Oh no, you can't combine them. I use acrylic underpainting for many reasons. One, I'm impatient, so I actually paint in acrylic with a blow dryer. It doesn't dry fast enough for me. And then you know, it allows, and on these paintings I never do preliminary drawings. I kind of draw as I go and move things around, and you can do that with acrylic without it being so messy. I also have a wicked allergy to the solvents that sometimes I just can't use it. And then like this one is like actually 99% acrylic and gesso. And then what I did was I would do thin glazes, and then oh boy, probably poisoned myself, put it on the studio floor and got it really level and just poured like a ton of Galkid medium on it and like, you know, do things like that. And so it had a little bit more depth because you could do anything you want with acrylic. I hate that it's plastic. And if you want it to look like an oil, it takes, you know, 1,000 hours. So you might as well just paint in oil if that's the case. I've had studios that were so hot that literally I couldn't paint for like 3 months on a piece because, especially when I was using oil sticks, because they were just like wet for months. And like I want to, you know, get going.
Cool, thank you. Robert, I was interested in your color choices in the relief. What are your thoughts? How do you choose
Well,
the
that was
colors?
actually one of the main impetuses for doing this show. An enormous amount of my work over the last few decades has been completely monochrome. You know, I've made a lot of completely white sculptures. And so, yeah, this series that's all in color has been a move for me, a move. I mean, I've done other, I've used polychrome before. It's not, but in recent years, I've been working a lot in monochrome. So that was one of the interests in these things. And yeah, they they use pumped up color and extremely in some cases highly artificial color. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously just a color choice in terms of contrast, the cool blue and the hot oranges. But the blue figures again, what it takes it to a certain unreality, and then there's also there's a toy-like aspect to these things, and that I don't want to push that too far, but it's there. And so of course the sort of plastic figures, there's a reference to toy soldiers and childhood and that kind of imaginative world, which plays into what these things are all about. Yeah, there's even in the one with the yellow figures, there's even a sort of a, it's almost a video game, feeling, right? It's highly artificial.
That's the one, the color really stuck out to me. That's why I asked the question. I was the most curious
really
about this one.
Electric. Yeah, electric. I had one photo. I've got a photograph of a video game with these, looking from above with these brilliant yellow and blue figures. I mean, there is that underlying feeling to it. Yeah.
Thank you. Kathleen, you don't work in a ton of color, but there's color present nonetheless. Are you thinking more value, or I mean, the color of the Shin-Collet is pretty particular?
It is. I have worked with color quite a bit, especially when I've done relief printmaking and monotype. I've used a lot of color. These prints I made over, I guess, the course of a year and a couple months. And it was, I tend to work in a series of an idea, and then I just keep going with that. I am starting to look at color, and with the Shin-Collet, I'm starting to figure out ways in which I can tint or somehow alter the color of the Japanese paper to introduce color into the prints. This technique is something I've been working hard to kind of perfect. And there aren't a lot of light fast Japanese papers that you can use that for something like this. But I am trying to figure out ways in which I can introduce color within a sort of a structure. Again, I mean, I know I sound like very structured, but I am, but mostly because I like to work in systems. And so I am starting to think about using more color, but this again was a specific series I did that was meant to be monochromatic.
Well, I thought the subtlety of the colors of the paper was really beautiful. I really enjoyed it.
It's really special paper, and the way that the ink takes to the Japanese paper is amazing. And so I'm kind of in love with that right now, and hopefully I can adapt it to also introduce more color. Although I really do like the monochromatic, because I think that it doesn't detract at all from the lines and things like that. But yeah. I want to kind of also start to think about putting color in maybe a systematic or a meaningful way, so that it can start to have a meaning in itself, like red, or the red can mean something, and then the green can mean something, and then try to create sort of a visual language around it.
Yeah, I think it's because color draws so much attention, but I don't see how color would really add to these pieces. Like, I think there is enough color there. I don't think they really need anything more than that. Yeah,
I feel the same way.
All right, we should probably wrap up now. So thank you for everyone for tuning in. Oh wait, there's one more. Let's see. Oh, quick question. What exact kind of paper is the Shin-Collet? You said it was a Japanese paper, but
I use a variety. I use Kozo, I use Gampi, and I use Kitakata. And partially I choose it because of the color it comes in, and partially just to try out different papers and things. But they're all in that same kind of family. They're very, very thin, and I mount them onto a heavier weight printmaking paper before I print.
All right. Thank you. Thank you everyone again for showing up and tuning
Thank
in.
you.
And thank you to all
Yeah,
the
thank you,
artists.
Thanks for
everyone.
having us.
Phenomenal. All right,
All
take
right.
care, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Peace.